work. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, good evening, everybody. Let's just scroll this down. I'm not sure if you can or can't hear me. I'm hoping you can. Am I muted? I'm not muted, so hopefully you should. If you don't mind just letting us know, if somebody can just message or just say you can hear me. Anyone? Maybe they can't. Oh, got a hands up, a thumbs up, and it's moving. I'm moving. Oh, thank you. Jumping right in, we are going to start our 3-step program that we haven't done in a while, but we have to get back into it. And we are going to start off with what's going on this week on the Yiddish calendar. There's big things to talk about. We also have to talk about what's going on in the Parshah this week. And from there, we're going to move into what's one practical, relevant life message that we can take from what's going on in the Parshah to be able to live like Geula, live ready for what Hashem has in store for us. And with Hashem's help, we will be able to make our life more productive, more joyful, less worrisome, and more uplifting. Here we go. This is what we have in store. This is what Hashem wants from us. What's going on in the calendar? We have already come to the last week, last complete week of the month of Iyar. And in this month, good evening, welcome aboard, coming in. Make it something. Coming as well. Please, Bakasha, Shalom Aleichem. Yes. The tea and the coffee is over there. Refreshments over there for those who come in person. Can you see the screen? It's not clear, but it's good. We are just starting. We had a little technical trouble, so it makes you on time. A few minutes. She's just parking the car. She's coming. Okay. Oh, she's here right now.
Yes, she's coming.
Quicker than you can imagine.
Yes.
Good evening. Welcome. We were just saying we had some technical difficulties, which makes you come on time. So Baruch Hashem, we were just starting. The first step is what's going on in the Yiddish calendar this week. And we were saying that this is the last final week of the Chodesh Iyar. The month of Iyar, this week is comfortable. The month of Iyar is a special time, as we said, as we started the month. Ani Hashem Reifecha. It's an acronym. An acronym means that the name of the month itself implies that there's good health in this month. So if anybody needs a refuah shlema, I can think right now on the top of my head of 3 or 4 people that need a refuah shlema. Hashem gave each and every one of them, and the Rebbe Yisrael, good gesund, good health, and success for all those who need. In addition to being the month of Iyar, it also happens to be that this coming Shabbos is going to be Shabbos Mevarchim. We're going to be blenching the new month. Which month are we blessing? We are about Sivan. What's Sivan famous for? Matan Torah. Absolutely, we're spot on. The Matan Torah that we are celebrating is the giving of the Torah, the way Hashem spoke to us. Who is us? Every single one. The Yiddish people, men, women, and children were all present, including the future generations, which includes us. And Hashem wanted to speak to every one of us. So that's what's going on the calendar. We're warming up to the month of Sivan, the month in which Hashem gives us the Torah. Interestingly and fascinatingly, this month that we are in now, the month which blesses the month of Sivan, is especially important bridge because it transforms from our own human effort, which is what the Spirit is all about. We put in our own effort to become better people, until the response that Hashem gives to that effort, which is when Hashem blesses us with His gift on His terms, on His level, and His magnitude. The starting point, though, is what we can do. So on the one hand, we have to and we must put in our best effort. And at the same time, we realize that although our best effort is limited, the response Hashem gives to that effort is much greater than anything that could be considered a direct achievement. And we need to have both. Put in our effort and also expect Hashem to be able to lift us much greater than we could ever achieve on our own. This is the bridge we're in this week. It's Mevarchim from Chodesh Iyar into Chodesh Sivan. It happens to be there are a few other great markers, and that is that this week we'll be starting a brand new Sefer. Last Shabbos was a Shabbos Chazak, and this is the Shabbos that breaks between the toichacha, the curses in last week's reading, and the excitement and the joy of Yom Tov next week. In which way? The toichacha were curses, very strict warnings. If we don't behave ourselves, bad things happen, not good things happen. And of course, it's the famous question that was actually last Shabbos. It was 2 Shabbos ago, but the beginning of last week, we were in New York for the Shabbat in the Heights Shabbaton, and one of the highlights of that.
When is Rosh Chodesh?
Sorry? Rosh Chodesh is going to be after next Shabbos.
It's my granddaughter's bat mitzvah.
On Rosh Chodesh?
Rosh Chodesh
With Mazel and Bracha. Very nice. Hashem should give her.
daughter.
Very nice. Bas mitzvah already.
Yeah.
Wow.
The boy's 14.
Baruch Hashem. Yidish Nachas in good health and a good gesund for the whole mishpacha. Please God. Hashem, you should have many more simchas.
I was supposed to be in America, but I canceled because she's coming in August. So I saved my money for her to be here.
Very good.
I don't have to spend the money to go to America if she's coming in August.
And you don't have to spend the time. Instead, you'll enjoy her time when she comes here.
Yeah, I bought a present here.
Very nice. Very nice. Mazel and bracha. Yes, very important. One of the questions that people ask when we read last week's Sedra about the curses that Hashem has is, how can Hashem be so strict? Doesn't sound like a nice Eibishter. Doesn't sound like a nice Hashem. We talk so strictly. We read through the Parshah, it doesn't sound scary. Shouldn't we be celebrating Bas Mitzvahs, Simchas, traveling for good occasions? Why is Hashem mixing in these harsh words? How does it tie in? And of course, the answer, which one of the answers I heard actually when I was over there at that Kinos, at that Shabbaton, the idea of Hashem caring about what we do must include that if we do good things, Hashem is happy. If we do not good things, Hashem has to choose to be angry. Otherwise, our choices don't make a difference or irrelevant. Part of our choices being real, significant, means that we make bad choices. There are consequences to our choices. So really, last week's Sedra was there to remind us that if we make choices, they have significance. But there's always a breather, a break between reading the strong, harsh words of the Toichacha that we read last week before we're ready to walk into Shavuos and celebrate receiving the Torah. There will always be at least one parsha in between. And that's how the calendar is set up every year. There's always at least one parsha, usually only one. Very few times, and there'll be two. But generally, it's only one because we need to have that sort of reminder, and we need to have that foundation that our choices matter. But we need to have a breather before we're ready to walk into Yom Tov, because this week, as we'll soon find out, is all about Bamidbar, is all about counting and the importance and significance of every individual yid. Every individual means that no matter what we've achieved or not achieved, no matter how much we have to show for ourselves, whether we're wealthy or poor, even righteous or not righteous, whether we're fast or slow, tall or short, it makes no difference. Everyone counts as one, and no one counts more than one. That's an insignificant and another important breather that we need. After we've learned how relevant our choices are, we have to then dig deeper and remind ourselves that regardless of our choices, we're important. Even if we have nothing to show for ourselves, we still count as one. And that's this week's Bamidbar. Let's talk about what goes on this week's Sedra. If we can help this change. Here we go. Should be crossing. There we are. I don't know if you can see what it says on the screen, but I'm going to read it out anyhow. We have here a summary of this week's Parshah. The name of this week's Parshah is Bamidbar. It's the name of the Sefer as well. What does Bamidbar mean? It literally translates as in the desert. The English translation of this book is generally translated as the book of, fourth book of the Torah is called?
Bamidbar, I don't know.
Numbers. Ever heard of the book of Numbers? Yeah. Why is it called the book of Numbers?
So we counted Israel.
Not one time, but many times. The Jewish people are counted and the numbers are very significant. And that's what we're talking about here. This week is about counting. and counting carries a message that everyone counts. And everyone counts equally. Everyone is one. In the Sinai desert, Hashem says to conduct a census of the 12 tribes of Israel. Moshe counts a total of 603,550 men of draftable age. What's draftable age? The age is 20 to 60 years old.
So we're talking a couple of millions. Then
at least.
If ladies and children.
Yeah, there you go. You have, let's say, on average, an equal amount. Let's say it's probably more, but an equal amount. So that's 600 plus 600 is 1.2 million. And then anyone over the age of 20 was once under the age of 20, right? So you can assume there's at least an equal amount per year underneath. And there's probably more because every generation grows. Because each two parents will have more than two children on average, at least in the counts that we have here. And therefore, it's safe to assume it's at least 2 million as an assumption. Well said. However, this is just 12 tribes out of 13. How do we have 13 tribes? Because the tribe of Yosef didn't split. So which tribe is not counted? Levi. And that's a mitzvah in this week's Sedra, not to count the tribe of Levi together with the other tribes. The tribe of Levi is numbering, they were counted separately, and they had a total of 22,300 males, but their count was more inclusive. It didn't just start from the age of 20. It started from the age of 30 days. 30 days. Why 30 days? Because this count wasn't about draft. It wasn't about counting people going to the army, which is where you'd start at the age of 20. This is a count to know how many male Leviim are there in general. And therefore the count started from anyone who was of a viable age at the age of 1 month. And older is all counted. They were counted separately, and their total was 22,300. Interestingly, it's not a very large number relative to the amount the other tribes had. The Leviim are there, or were counted to be servants and people of service in the Mishkan, and they replaced the original plan. Plan A was going to be that all the firstborns of every family would be the servants. So the firstborn boys in each family would be automatically designated as the servants of Hashem, going back to the times of the 10th of the 10 plagues, Makas B'chayris, in which Hashem passed over the Jewish houses and saved, didn't kill the firstborn to the Jewish families. And in exchange for that, every firstborn was automatically born as a child of Hashem, dedicated to serve. But now that's going to be exchanged. And the reason for that is because, unfortunately, not all the firstborns had been well behaved, specifically at the story of the golden calf. And therefore Hashem says, hold on, we cannot have people of service who have broken the rules in such an extreme way. We're going to exchange him for the only tribe that didn't break the rules, and that was the tribe of Levi. And this is where it gets funny, because the head count of how many firstborn boys in all of the 12 tribes were almost exactly the same amount as the men in tribe of Levi. I say almost. There was a shortfall of 273. 273. You're talking about 22,500 and you're short of 273. So what do you do?
Pidyon.
That's how you had Pidyon Ben, and the original Pidyon Ben was only for 273 people, because the rest of them were direct exchange. Firstborn for Levi. Now I imagine the average average non-Levi family was told that 22,000 people, free exchange. 273 firstborns are going to have to pay 5 shekels, silver shekels, to exchange themselves. The first thing everyone's going to say is, okay, it's not my son. My son's for sure exchanged for free. It's somebody else's son. They'll have to pay the 5 shekels. So who's going to pay the 5 shekels? Who will be the 273? Everybody? You have a lot more than 5 shekels then, because you'll have 22,000, 5 shekels more than you need.
Keep it.
Keep it. I like it. But I'll say, no, I'm not going to. What are you going to do? Says Moshe Rabbeinu. The instruction is goyrel. What's a goyrel? Lottery. 22,000 or whatever pieces of paper, and only 273 of them were blank. All the rest of them said Levi. And each firstborn had to come pick out their ducat. The one who got one without a Levi would pay the 5 shekel. That was the original ransom money, redemption money that was for those firstborns. And then we also have the Parshah continues. All this is in this week's Parshah. The Parshah then continues to tell us what happens besides for the head count. There was another important part, which also includes numbers, and this is where each shevet, each tribe, camped in the different places. So when they set up camp, they had a designated area with a designated flag. Each one had their own area. And what was amazing was that they had to camp in tribal allocations, which meant you got to stick with your family, which was probably very welcome in its time, but it created some sort of structure amongst the people. What's fascinating is not only when they set up camp did they do it this way, when they traveled and broke camp and they moved from one place to another throughout the desert, they would also travel in the same formation, tribe by tribe. Okay, we all then, once we're talking about what happens when they travel, we go on to say that when they traveled, they each took their family, their tents, their belongings, and traveled amongst the tribes. The tribe of Levi, however, had a different instruction, both for when they camped and for when they traveled. When they camped, they would camp not in the one of the four sides of the Mishkan like all the other 12 tribes. They would create a buffer. And they had a very strong responsibility, which was to make sure that no one by mistake strolled in to areas that were off bounds to the average people. They were considered the guard, the national guard, the holy guard, the guard that would protect Hashem's home, not so much from terrorists, chas v'shalom, but to protect people, protect the Jewish people from coming to the wrong place. And when they would break camp to travel, there would be the same people whose job would be to make sure that the items and the building of the Mishkan were carefully covered in respect and transported with the right respect so that it wouldn't come to any sort of mistakes. And when they would set up camp, it would be the tribe of Levi again who would be responsible for building back up and placing back all the different items into the right place. All this is etc. And then we have the head count of which tribe sat where and how many were in each one. And the flags are mentioned also that each tribe had their own flags. It's a loaded parsha. And as we said, the general theme of the parsha is that numbers tell us how significant each one is. Just to do a little anecdote, a metaphor to help us understand how numbers share a message of importance. If you go to the grocery shop and you buy half a kilo of grapes, do you know how many grapes are in that bag? No, but you know you've got a half a kilo. At least you trust the shop to weigh it for you, and it's half a kilo. However, if you go to the same shop, you buy yourself a dozen eggs. Do you know how many eggs are in the dozen?
Yeah.
How many?
Dozen.
A dozen is? 12. Very good. How's a baker's dozen? 1 second. A dozen eggs. If one of the eggs are missing inside the tray, you'll say, excuse me, there's a missing tray. If one of the grapes are missing inside the bag of grapes, okay, fine. It's a half a kilo-ish. What's the difference? Because the egg is a more significant item than a grape. That's just the way it is. Things that are counted are because they're significant. Then you get into the halachic debate if it's the count that makes it important or because it's important that you count it. I think to most people, we understand because it's important, because it's significant, therefore we count it. So why did Hashem count us? And Rashi goes further and says, well, doesn't Hashem know everything? Does he have to really count us to know? He wants us to know that we are countable. Not only accountable, that's what last week, this week we are countable, we are significant. It's so important. I think in today's day and age, it's so often that you have teenagers or youngsters, or even adults who are questioning their own self-worth. And this week's parasha comes and tells us, please stop questioning. It's not a Jewish thing, this sort of question. Am I worth anything? You don't have to achieve nothing. You don't have to have anything to show for yourself to know that you're significant. And now that I know that I'm significant, should I do more or less? If I'm so important, should I do more or less?
More.
Should I compromise my importance and waste it, chas v'shalom? Or should I say, I'm important anyhow, I might as well live it up? No, of course not. If I really recognize that I have self-importance, I'll do more, not less. But I shouldn't convince myself that I need to be well-behaved in order to be okay. I'm so important Therefore, I should be well behaved. Very, very powerful message. And this is the build-up towards Matan Torah. Now that we know that we are accountable and countable, let's look at this week's Sedra for one practical, relevant life message that we could walk away with. See if this can work. What's the title? Yeah. The title is supposed to read, if we can get it to say this, Leadership Lessons, Personal, Local, and Global. We have to get the screen next time. Not so clear because the screen is not here. I put it away for Shabbos. Forgot to bring it up. Next time we'll try and bring up the thing. So we'll read it out each time. It is quite text-based, but we'll say it enough times that you won't have to read it inside. Okay, so we're talking about leadership. How does leadership tie into this week's Sedra? So fascinatingly, the leaders of the Jewish people are mentioned quite specifically in the opening of the Parshah, and they play an important role in the Parshah. Who are the leaders that we are talking about? Not just Moshe, who's the king and the leader, the teacher of the Jewish people. Not just Aaron, who's the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who is his right-hand wingman. Also, in addition to that, we have the passage that tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was told, instructed by Hashem, that before you start to count the Jewish people in the census, he must take with him the leaders of each of the tribes. This is the pasuk. Su'u esroish kol adas b'nei Yisrael. Take the sum of the entire congregation of the children of Israel. However, v'itchem yihiyu. With you there shall be ish lamata, one man from each tribe. Together with Moshe and Aaron who are going to do the census, they must bring with them one representative from each of the tribes. Ish rosh lebeis avosav, who? The one who is the head of his father's house. What's his father's house? Interesting, just to throw it out there. Some people make the mistake of assuming, others people try and intentionally make this mistake sound real, that the Jewishness of a Jew depends on the father, beis avoisam, and they try to sometimes quote this pasuk that God follows by the father's house. And the answer, of course, is that Judaism always followed their mothers. If the mother is Jewish, the child is Jewish. However, which tribe we come from within Judaism, within the Jewish people, follows the father's tribe. Nuance, it's detailed, right? You got to remind yourself and you got to concentrate on how this works. Whether or not I'm Jewish follows my mother. Whether I'm a Kohen or a Levi or Yisrael, and which tribe in Yisrael, that will follow my father. So if somebody was born to a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father, then they are Jewish, but they don't fit into any tribe, which was very much the case even from day one, from the get-go. There were many Egyptian converts who converted into the faith. Their father wasn't Jewish. They converted in, and therefore they had retained, they had acquired a soul as if they had a Jewish mother, but they didn't fit into a tribe, and that was part of the reality. When they crossed the Yam Suf, there was the 12 pathways plus the 13th for everyone else. But the tribes follow the father's family. And therefore, the leader of the father's house would be the leader of that tribe, is how the pasuk describes it. Rosh lebeis avosav hu. And Moshe Rabbeinu needs to collect these 12 tribal leaders, and he has to make the census, including them. Okay, we haven't got any questions so far. So far, so good. Easy enough. But wait, here we go. This is still in this week's Parsha. We have a list, 12 names. Each one's listed, who they are, exactly which tribal leader was for which tribe. And then the pasuk, after naming those 12, after those 10 psukim that list the 10 things, says the following. These people were summoned by the nation, Eila Kuriei Ha'eda, Nisei Amatais Avosa, the princes of the paternal tribes. They were summoned and called by the nation, and therefore they were the princes. Let me ask you, do you think the Torah is advocating for democratically elected leaders? Or Moshe Rabbeinu dictates, not use dictatorship, but dictated leaders? Which would you say, you know what, without the pasuk, what would you say would be a more effective leader? A leader that is voted in by the people versus a leader that is superimposed upon the people just because they were chosen by somebody else. What would you say?
I'll say Moshe Rabbeinu's voice because he knows God's will.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say That whatever
God
Moshe,
will who will be the leader.
and Moshe is just repeating what Hashem wants, and therefore listening to it, Moshe's choice would be the most effective way. Interesting thought. Great. Anyone else on Zoom, in person? I want to weigh in on this one. What would you say is the better setup to establishing leadership?
Someone who voted in, I suppose.
Voted in.
Yeah, because the people want them. I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, I was waiting for an explanation why. I was about to say why, but that's a good answer. If the people voted him in, then that leader's wanted, at least by the majority, that's how they got in. So at least there's a majority that wants this leader. Okay, interesting. Anyone have a counter argument to either of these? Moshe Rabbeinu is just telling us what Hashem wants. Hashem does everything. Versus counter argument. Moshe Rabbeinu is going to say what he wants, but the people might not appreciate it fully. Whereas if they voted it in, at least the majority of them want that. So there's a good argument on the other side.
But it's not just voting somebody in, it's the heads of their tribe. So it's somebody that they trust and trust to represent them. It's not like voting what we get today.
Wow. You know what? I don't know if you appreciate how great your medium is, because that kind of bridges these two sides exactly where we're going to go with this lesson. So we have 3 spot on answers, exactly what we needed. I'm ready to move. You can give the class instead of me if you like. Here we go. On the one hand, we need to have a leadership that is absolute correct. On the other hand, we also need leadership that's approachable, trusted on a personal level, and that's a different type of setup. And the way Hashem navigates this is that he has both. There's leadership that is dictated, and then there's also leadership that is called out by the people. And the leadership who's going to lead each tribe on its own, it's exactly like Sylvia just said, it's about the people nominating someone amongst their own tribe. So it's not from some different tribe. They trust them. They trust that they have the tribal interests in mind, and they become the nominated leaders of that tribe. And that explains, in a way, why these leaders had to be present at the census, so that the people should feel like their guy's in there. They have one of theirs in the exec box or whatever else you call it. Okay, so far so good. It gets a little deeper. The plot thickens as we go along. Here's an interesting, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshit says the following: God instructed Moshe, and you should choose teachers and judges. Nevertheless, Moshe did not select the princes, though that would have been appropriate. This was so the people would not say, how will these leaders benefit us? They will certainly side with Moshe on every matter. Thus the Torah describes them as, I can't even read this myself. Okay, what was that? Summoned by the nations, for the nation chooses them, not Moshe. There we go. Here's a little diagram that's supposed to help us, a little picture that helps us understand and appreciate if the leadership is going to be able to move and motivate an entire following. It needs to have both those elements. Let's just read what it says in the paragraph. The need to select homegrown leaders that can rule with integrity places a huge burden on the leaders. What's the burden? What's the complication? Here, how he says it. On one hand, leaders must be homegrown to be familiar with the people and their problems to earn local trust. However, on the other hand, this is the challenge. If I'm a local, if I grew up with the people I'm leading, it's very difficult to be firm, to be impartial, and to treat friends and foes equally. But a leader certainly has to be integral and cannot bend the rules, and therefore there's a very difficult challenge about walking that fine line. And therefore you find that very often voted leaders end up doing things for their votees, the voters who voted them in, more so than for those who didn't vote for them, or they will continue doing what their party wanted because there's their party wants. However, in Yiddishkeit, that's not allowed. It's not allowed to do things just because I think it's better for my guys. So this is an interesting balance, but it gets more than that. Let's have what's the Kli Yakar? Kli Yakar is saying a similar idea. Davar, let's do this. Rashi. Rashi is one of our favorite leaders, translators and explainers. Rashi has an interesting explanation. Rashi says, when the Pasuk describes the Jewish people voting in their leaders, it says, Kriyei ha'edah, those who were already called upon by the nation, by the tribes. When did the tribes nominate these leaders? Where do we find anywhere that these leaders were nominated by the people? The Pasuk says they were nominated by people, almost like we know already they were nominated. And Rashi seems to explain, where do we ever see that they were nominated?
It's yet in time. They nominated the leader for each tribe, no?
It's not in the Torah that they nominated the leaders. It's not. I don't think the Torah says, and they called upon these people. So not in Yisrael's time. Over here we have it. And interestingly, in next week's Parshah, Parshas Nosai, we're going to read that these leaders were the leaders who brought the first offerings in the Chanukah Sabayis, in the inauguration of the Mishkan, when we first had the house of Hashem built. The very first offerings.
Who chose them to bring their first Mishkan thing?
Very good.
They
Very
were
good.
chosen before that.
Very good. It seems like they've already been nominated and they are the leaders already. The question is, when were they nominated? Just to put a span in the works a little more.
Maybe they're the leaders. Some purpose leader by nature.
Okay.
Was it the people who were the policemen?
Boom. I was going to say that. That's what Rashi says. It's on the screen. Says Rashi, they were the Jewish overseers in Egypt who were beaten for the sake of the Jewish slaves that they oversaw. So you're absolutely right. They were born to be leaders. And who spotted their leadership qualities?
Yeshua.
Way back earlier.
Moshe.
Earlier still. Paroi. The Pharaoh was looking around who would be the responsible Jews who would be held accountable as leaders. They keep the slaves in check. And Pharaoh nominated them, not by choice. They were nominated by the king, the monarch. And they were called to task. And they were beaten for that task. Why were they beaten? Because when the Jewish brothers were not able to fill the quotas, they were the ones that bore the brunt of it. And they refused to pass on that hardship to their brethren. They said, we'd rather take the beatings ourselves than wind up and make our brother's life more difficult. And when they left Mitzrayim, these were the people who were already nominated as leaders. Amazing, fascinating fact. This is Rashi telling us that this is when were they nominated? Already before they left Mitzrayim. Amazing. Let's see this inside. There's another little quote. The princes were wealthy and powerful. But these are type of people who are wealthy and powerful, but know how to use their wealth. And they know how to use their power. And when they use them, they were respected for what they use. Here's the third paragraph. They were paragons of virtue. Powerful, but not arrogant. Wealthy, but not aloof. What's the secret? Because besides being wealthy and powerful, they were also very, very much Yirei Shamayim. Yirei Shamayim means people who feared heaven. They understood what they were here for. Where do we know this from? Where did they demonstrate this? Back in Mitzrayim already. They already demonstrated that they appreciated that power means power to serve. Wealth is wealth in order to serve. And that's a whole different ballgame. And these are the type of leaders that the Jewish people had for each of their tribes. So if we were to stop right here, we already have a lesson a little bit that the Parshah is telling us, Moshe Rabbeinu, you want to go and count the people? You want to help the people appreciate how countable they are? Don't go on your own. Take with people who they trust. And you know why they trust them? Because these are people who are wealthy and powerful, but have Yirei Shamayim in a demonstrable way. Amazing. Moshe Rabbeinu does exactly that. He takes them with. But this is up to this point, is almost like surface level. Chassidus jumps in right here. This is where Chassidus takes all this to the next level by pointing out another little intricate detail in this whole story and helping us discover another whole level of what it means to be powerful, wealthy, leadership, and still be Yerei Shemayim. Another whole level what we can learn from this week's Parsha and apply to our own personal life so that we live a switched on life. We're going to live with the Parsha. We turn to the Torah for relevant, practical life messages. This is this week. It's Parshas Bamidbar now. This is what we are going to be walking into the whole month of Sivan with. And this is the Shabbos that leads us into Shavuos, which is going to be next Friday. It's a big stuff. So let's do it. Here's another interesting observation. The observation is that the pasuk says, "If Yikach Moshe v'Aaron sanoshim eila," Moshe and Aaron took these men, asher nikvu b'shemus, who were indicated by names. Okay, the focus being on the last word in the pasuk, names, shemus. Why does the pasuk want to say that these are named individuals? He took these people, or the people who were indicated. Something about the word shemos. These were people who were called out and named as leaders. And the Chassidus is going to tell us that the naming is in addition to being nominated, they were also called out by name, not just by the people, but also by Hashem. Hashem took these people who had been nominated by their tremendous commitment, determination, Yerei Shemayim, God-fearing people, but they had also been upgraded on Hashem's terms, and they'd been called by name by Hashem. And that's another whole lesson. Let's read it inside. There's another pasuk from this week's Parshah. The entire nation assembled on the first day of the second month, and declared their pedigree according to their families. According to their families and according to their fathers' houses. When they took the census, it wasn't just to know how many people are around, or as you said earlier, how many people could join the draft. They had to remain as part of a count to their particular tribes. Meaning that besides having an overall total of how many people in the army, we had to know how many people were in each of the unique tribes. The Mefarshim, the commentators, explain two interesting things. Number one is, why would you need an army divided according to tribes? And they say, they help us understand that in the Jewish army, a great soldier wasn't necessarily a very strong person who can lift a lot of weight. A great soldier wasn't necessarily somebody who knows how to spar or to use a sword better. What was a great soldier in Jewish standards? Emunah, or more general, somebody who had more spiritual credit. Somebody who was definitely going to walk into war and battle with a lot of merit. Somebody who had less merit was considered a good soldier, but not as good. Fascinating, in the times of David HaMelech, the soldiers maybe weren't as righteous and were actually much more powerful. However, David HaMelech set up, as part of his army, a home front, which meant that there were soldiers who went out to battle, and the soldiers who stayed behind, besides for looking after the locals, there was an entire brigade, and their job was to sit and study Torah. And David HaMelech gave equal importance to the merits as to the fighters. And they were both considered fighters. And that's one interesting observation we have. We had to keep them in tribes so that the schus, the merit of each tribe, remained intact. Interesting observation from the version. Another interesting observation is, and that is, it slipped my mind what I wanted to say. There's another interesting observation from the Mefarshim. It'll come to me in a minute. Let's keep going. They explain, why did we need to have the taskmasters, the people who were the leaders in Egypt, to be here? Fascinating. I think this is the Rashi. It's not the Rashi. It's a Sforno, maybe. Is it this one? Yeah, here's the Sforno. The tribal princes must be at your side because each is the head of his father's home, and the pedigree of the tribesmen will be familiar to them. When the Pharaoh expected certain quotas, they would have had to have known who was part of the tribe, who was under their jurisdiction. So now that we have to associate people to a particular tribe, it made sense for them to be there. If someone comes masculine, yeah, I'm from the tribe of Dan, the leader of Dan will know, actually, you're not part of the tribe of Dan. I know who is and who is not. So they were the well-placed individuals to be part of a census as well. And that's on a Mefarshim level, on a Pshat level, but taking it a little deeper. Here's the Chassam Sofer. Here we go. The real reason why 12 leaders had to go around with Moshe Rabbeinu to do the census, the way he explains the question is, the background to this observation is, Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't enough to have one leader at each tribe's census. Every tribe had Moshe and all 12 leaders. Next tribe, Moshe and all 12 leaders. Moshe and all 12 leaders at each one. So the Chassidic masters ask, why do we need to have all 12 tribal leaders at each tribe census? Shouldn't we just have each tribe have their leader at their census? It goes even deeper because the tribes didn't even do the census in one place, according to most opinions. It's an observation how the Pasuk phrases each of the callings of each tribe. The last one, it's not Livnei Naphtali, it's just Bnei Naphtali. Each tribe stepped aside to their zone to be counted. Why did each of the 12 leaders have to come? And here's where we learn, maybe you could call it the third lesson of leadership. Lesson number one, the leader's role is to help each person understand their quality and they have to be trusted. Step number two is that the power of leadership is designed to serve. It's there to help the follow. Everything we have is in order to help the fellowship be able to grow. So we're here to serve and everything we have is there. Third lesson, and perhaps this is where it becomes most important, is that we have to learn from this week's Parshah that the reason why each of the 12 leaders had to be present at each, and all of them had to be present at each of the 12 individuals, because we have to remind ourselves that we have our personal roles. Besides having a personal role, we have the role of being a leader to those people in our circle of influence. And then in addition to that, there's a third message. And that third message was the message that we learned from seeing how the tribal leaders are not just leaders of their people who they had self-sacrifice for. They are called upon to be leaders of the entire people, even those people who are not directly in their circle of influence. They have to team up together to figure out ways to create a global, much larger impact that's much larger than anything they could achieve on their own, that they are self-responsible for, but still have to gather together and figure out ways to make the entire Klal Yisrael in this context a better place. And the message is clear. The question is, however, how could we hold one person accountable, not just for themselves and the people around them, but accountable for others around? I'm going to use, for just a few moments, a metaphor that's maybe a little closer to home, but it's the same message, and it kind of borrows what we're trying to do here. Let's just say we have an individual, and she grew up, she was 10 years old, she was very well behaved in school. She was 20 years old, she was very, very, very well behaved in her further education. She gets married. Now, all of a sudden, besides for her own responsibility of looking after herself and her own choices, she now is all of a sudden also responsible to create an atmosphere in her home that will nurture her husband's growth. We're now stretched her responsibility from being child, teenager, adult, grown adult, to now be also a spouse. And she's going to invest her own energy and her own mind space to be able to figure out ways to help her family unit grow. That's her and her spouse. And then, please God, she has children, and the children grow. She's now stretched not only her resources, sleeping less, maybe having less private time, having less money to spend herself, maybe less whatever. But also, in addition to that, she's also now, while she's lessening her own self-feeding, she's also stretching her output And she's now also looking after her entire family. That's amazing. That's praiseworthy. That's real leadership. That's somebody who's brought up and educated, raising a family and taking responsibility for all those units inside her circle of influence and taking it seriously and putting her full in. Now, if I come to this mother and we say to her, besides you looking after yourself, your spouse, your family, you should also be doing things for your neighbors, for everyone on the block, for the whole community. It's a bit of a stretch. And sometimes it's not fair. Maybe she doesn't have that sort of emotional space or mind space or bandwidth. And the answer halachically is that she does not have that obligation if she doesn't have that bandwidth. And she isn't obligated to do communal things and worry about the community if she can't stretch herself that way. Nevertheless, in this week's Parshah, we learn these Nesiim were not only nominated by their tribesmen and therefore did everything they could beyond the call of duty originally, and now they turned into the leaders and did everything they could on behalf of their tribesmen and did a fantastic job, and therefore they were called upon as those trusted parties who would help and join. Moshe Rabbeinu in this week's Parashah tells us there's one level that we were nominated by the people. And there's another level that we were called by name by Hashem also. And this has almost like a double-sided bonus. Being called by Hashem to duty, number one, stretches the bar much more. And number two, gives us superpowers to be able to do that. Before we get into it, I want to just say the end so we don't get it wrong, and then we'll build it back. The end is going to be, the conclusion is that even this dedicated mother, housewife person who's an individual to herself can make an enormous impact without feeling the stress or the load for other people. She can help. Sometimes it's just by being supportive. Sometimes it's just by taking a small interest. Sometimes it's by giving good advice or good feedback, constructive criticism. But she has the ability to be impactful on her global surrounding as well, in addition to whatever she's doing for herself and an immediate family. And the way she's able to do that is because Hashem has called her by name. That's where we're going with this. Let's take it back a few steps and go back to the leaders who were in Mitzrayim. And they were leaders who had demonstrated enormous self-sacrifice. And they leave Mitzrayim, and the people of their tribe say, you should be the head of our tribe. When it comes time to travel in the desert, you will walk in the front. If we have an issue amongst our tribe, we all agree we will go to you, and you will tell us how to proceed. When we settle and set up camp, and there's the miracle well of water that will be in the center of the camp, you will be the one who will take your staff and create a canal that the fresh water should reach even to our camp, because you are the person who we all trust, nominated by the people. Tremendous bonus. And as we said, that has to be balanced with Yiras Shamayim, because otherwise it's misused. The leader could end up looking after their own interests in the name of leadership. And that's also, of course, every time we learn this is almost like a level 2 lesson that we have to appreciate that whenever we have a leadership position, power is in order to serve. Wealth is in order to serve, and you do the same thing for everything else. And then we get to the third level, which is here. Besides for, these are the people, Kriyei or Eidah, who were nominated by the people. They were also Asher Nikvu B'Shem. These are people who have been called out by name. Moshe Rabbeinu gets told by Hashem every single one of those names of the people who were nominated are also called by name. In Chassidus in general, names have an interesting space. How important is your name to you? Is there anyone else you know that has the same name as you? I think lots of people have my name. My name's Levi. There's lots of Levis around the world. How personal is my name? On one hand, it's not personal at all. It doesn't say much about me. At the same time, if you're talking about me and you don't use my name, you use a different name, I get funny about it. If you want to talk to me, call me by my name. It's personal. It's me. Not only that, Chassidus often uses the example, if somebody, God forbid, faints, calling their name is a good way to call out their inner life and wake them up. Call them by their name, because the name is almost like a tag that associates itself with a deeper, innermost self. It's an interesting balance. Go on, Sylvia, you going to say something?
Yes, because when you read through the Torah, Hashem calls to people, and in a quiet voice, not in a loud voice, and they respond, and like the burning bush speaking to Moses and things like that, people respond. So and he does call to them by their names and things. So as in this Parshah now, where the leaders were by name, it's reaffirming that Hashem knows each and everybody's name, and every tribe knew, even if they couldn't remember them all, Hashem does, and every tribe leader went through every name.
Fascinating. I'm going to use similar ideas, but I would like to drive home another message in addition to what you just shared. Thank you, Sylvia. But besides the idea of people being known by name and Hashem calling out to each one of them and in the half of the tribes, in a leadership role, when it says Hashem calls them by name, Hashem is calling out their innermost abilities. And the way the Rebbe explains this, it's abilities that they themselves perhaps were unaware that they had. They weren't aware that they were capable of doing that. But Hashem calls out their name and empowers them to have a global perspective, which is much larger than even their ability, their workload. They cannot stretch their mind space to worry about people in a different tribe because they have enough on the plate as it is. But they can band together. And together they can do things to change the global reality, atmosphere, environment. How? Not because they're going to get involved as detailed as they are in their own personal responsibilities, but because they're going to be aware. They're going to open themselves to the idea, I can change the world. Now, when I lead my own personal tribe, I'm changing the world through this. I'm not just upgrading my tribe, I'm upgrading everybody. What I'm going to do practically hasn't changed much, but the motive, the drive has changed enormously. That's not so much a technical change, but it's a change at heart. And it's a change of, I don't know if the word is responsibility, I think it's a change of ability. And that's something that Hashem gifts every leader in their level by calling us out by name. Quick story along these lines is a very famous rabbi who became much more famous in his later life, who's now unfortunately passed away, but all of a sudden, the former chief rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sachs. Unbelievable leader he was in his time, the difference and impact that he made. Yet when he was still a young man, he was deciding between being an accountant, a lawyer, or something else. And he was traveling through the States, and he went to see different great Jewish leaders, and he went to interview the Rebbe. And as the way he says it, he asked his questions. The Rebbe gave him brief, short answers to the point, and then turned the tables on him. Instead of him asking questions, the Rebbe started asking questions back to him. He wasn't ready for that. But when he left that Yechidus, he describes, and he said this in his inauguration, when he first became a Rebbe, he says all of a sudden, the Rebbe helped him realize not to discover a Rebbe, not to discover a great leader. The Rebbe helped him discover himself. He all of a sudden realized, through answering the Rebbe's questions to him, that his answers demonstrated to himself that he was born to be a leader. He never dreamt of that. It wasn't one of the 3 aspirations he had. It just wasn't one of them. And following that advice, he took the Rebbe's advice, he became a rabbi, and later he became a rabbi of rabbis, until he became the chief rabbi, one of the most well-known rabbis in this generation. And where did it start from? Someone called him by name. Someone uncovered for him an ability to impact, to influence, that it wasn't even in his realm. This is this week's Parshah, calling to us. Yes, indeed, we have our own responsibilities. We have to be misyaches. We have to have yichos. We have to make sure we live up to where we come from. We are important. We are accountable. We have to live up to that. Number 2, we have to be leaders. We have to recognize that all the wealth and power that I have is here in order to serve, to help others. Number 2. But number 3 is much more than that. Not only have we been nominated to the leadership positions that we have, we've been called out by Hashem. Hashem is calling us to recognize that our impact is much more than our direct circle of influence. When I walk down the street smiling because I know that I might be able to influence the surroundings in an indirect way, I might say to myself, well, why is that my responsibility? And the answer is, I've been called by Hashem by name. I've been named to be this person. He woke me up this morning. He knows what I'm up to, and he's voting. He's voting in me, in you, in each one of us. And as Hashem calls us by name, all of a sudden, superpowers happen. Things we never thought we could have an impact on, all of a sudden start being impacted by our mindset. This week's Parshah is calling to us. You can. You are already in this game. Hashem has already called you by name. So let's step up. Hashem should give us the ability to be matzliach, to enjoy the nachas of seeing impact. And even until then, we should continue striving forward with joy, knowing that it's almost Shavuos, it's almost Chodesh Sivan, and there's good things coming our way. Thank you very much for joining. Questions, comments, and suggestions are welcome. Same time, same place next week.
Thank you, and God willing, see you Wednesday.
Very New Road, yes?
Okay.
See you there.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All the best. Have a good evening. Take care, everybody. Going once.